I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review, and this is the Book Review Podcast. Many months ago, back in January, we gave you a look ahead at the first half of the year in books. Now it's June, and it's time for a preview of what summer has in store. Joining me today are book review editors Liz Egan and Joumana Khatib, and the three of us are going to offer a very eclectic, not at all comprehensive, look at books that we're interested in that are coming out in June, July, and August. And whether you're planning on taking a week off, a weekend off, or even just a day off, we hope that one of these titles will be the right one for you. Liz, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Joumana, you've been here a million times. Welcome back.
Hi, Gilbert. Thanks for having me.
Joumana, you're in L.A. What are people reading in L.A.? What are you seeing in the stores? What are you seeing on the streets?
So since I'm in LA, I've been thinking a lot about the literary canon of Los Angeles. And so it seems perfect to start our conversation today with one of Los Angeles's most beloved literary figures, which is Easy Rawlins from Walter Mosley. So in Mosley's latest novel, which is called Farewell, Amethystine, we find Easy, he's 50, improbably, he's made it to middle age, and he takes on a missing persons case. A woman comes to him and says, I need you to help me find my husband. And he gets uneasy about this right away, and it spins out into all the things we love about the Easy Rawlins series. Okay. So Joumana is in L.A. Liz, you and I, we're calling in from our homes in New Jersey, but I know you just got back from a trip up Maine way. I don't know what you were doing there. You don't have to say, but the first book that you're going to talk about that comes out this summer is set in Maine. Tell us about it.
Yes, I just came back from Maine, and the first book I wanted to talk about is by Courtney Sullivan, who wrote a novel called Maine, but her new novel is called The Cliffs. It begins with a house on a cliff, and a girl named Jane becomes obsessed with this house, which is a respite for her from her alcoholic mother, from difficult family circumstances. And the house is especially enticing because the residents have moved out and left the place intact. And so you begin to wonder about the history of the house. Jane then returns to the house as an adult, running from a professional embarrassment, returning home to clean out her mother's house after she dies. And we see the house in a different incarnation. And this time it's been HGTV-ified. There's a new resident in the house who is upgrading it in some ways. But in Jane's mind, what she's doing is committing blasphemy to the old Victorianness of the house. This leads to a standoff between the two women and to the actual true history of the house, which has to do with psychics and indigenous people and alcoholics, people who've been displaced. And once again, Courtney Sullivan delivers your classic summer blockbuster, which includes a love story, friendship, regional history. This book has it all, in addition to a lot of salty air and beautiful views.
You don't seem like a person into psychics, Liz.
I'm really actually not into psychics, but this book has...
I saw that coming. As somebody who is into psychics, I saw that coming.
Yeah.
I've actually never been to a psychic. I wouldn't mind going to one. I'm sure I could use one.
I know a guy.
This book has some really interesting history about psychics in and around New England. And Jane, I should have mentioned, grows up to become an archivist. So we're really in professional hands as she unpacks the history of the town where she grew up and this house that she's become obsessed with.
Liz, did you ever have a house growing up that you were obsessed with? Like Jane in this book, or like Lady Bird in the movie Lady Bird? You walked by it all the time. You drove by it all the time. You were like, that is my house.
I've always been kind of obsessed with houses. As soon as I got my driver's license, I just loved driving around looking at houses that were like 10 times bigger than my house and seemed a lot more interesting. How about you?
I grew up around apartment buildings and they all look like crap. So definitely not. But now that I live in the suburbs, I drive around. I was driving around your town, Liz, yesterday on that street where all the big houses are. And I was saying to myself, sure would be nice to live in one of those houses.
Yeah, there are some gorgeous ones. Really gorgeous. Gilbert, what are you looking forward to reading this summer?
First, I'm looking forward to going to a psychic, which I do every month. I have a gal for you. 2, I'm looking forward to a horror novel in which no psychics play a part. This one is called Horror Story by Paul Tremblay. So I know that people, often wait until the fall, obviously, which is like scary movie season, October. I'm a year-round person. I think I've said that on this podcast before. I love being scared. I love being unsettled. I love reading books that are not doorstoppers, and this is one of those. This is about essentially a never-released horror movie that is surrounded by tragedy because of a bunch of stuff that happens during the shooting. It's decades later. It's about to be remade or rebooted. There's one person left who survived from the original production, and this movie in the ensuing decades has become a cult object, as horror movies have a tendency to do, and then a lot of spooky stuff happens. So that's right up my alley. When it's hot, I love to get cool. I love to get spooky. Paul Tremblay is a horror writer who people might be familiar with because he wrote A Cabin at the End of the World, which is made into an M. Night Shyamalan movie. There's several horror books coming out this summer. This is the one that I alighted on.
I can tell you with certainty that I'm not going to read the Paul Tremblay because, as I've said in many different outlets, I am a wuss and I hate being scared, especially when it's hot, because I find being hot scary enough. However, I do have a scary novel, a psychological dread domestic novel that if you are a scaredy cat or wuss or wimp like me, and we should wear it proudly, I think some of you might like Liars by Sarah Manguso, it's a novel that follows a woman who really wants to be an artist. And she meets a man who has similar ambition. They get married, they start a family, and she feels like everything is falling into place for her. She's going to be able to have a family, a rich inner life, all this. Fast forward, this woman's entire life is subsumed by her husband's ambition and desires and drive. And much in a way that I love eavesdropping, I love a good marital dread story. And I think that this also is really smart about the ways that every relationship, let alone every marriage or every family, is predicated on some kind of mythology and the lies we tell each other about ourselves, about our family, and what happens when they really catch up to you. Can you tell I've been with my family for a week? Yeah, just kidding.
That sounds really good.
It's really good. It's really good.
Are you saying marital dread is the truest horror story of all? Is that what's happening here?
As the only person on this call who's not been married, ask me in 5 years, according to my psychic.
I have another creepy book to recommend if you guys are interested. Do you want me to tell you?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. It takes place in the Adirondacks. It's called The God of the Woods, and it's by Liz Moore, whose last book was Long Bright River. She's perfected this novel at the intersection of literary, crime, dark mystery. That's how I would describe The God of the Woods. It begins in 1975 at a children's summer camp in the Adirondacks. The camp wakes up and one camper is missing. She's 13 years old. Her name is Barbara. She is the daughter of the Von Lars family who own the camp. And to add to the creepiness factor, her older brother disappeared from the camp as a camper. So we toggle between several different perspectives. We wonder if there's a serial killer on the loose. We wonder if one of the counselors is responsible. But mostly we turn our attention to the Von Lars family, which has been in this tiny town for generations. And they kind of remind me of the family in It's a Wonderful Life, the Bailey family gone wrong. And we start to piece together what has happened and what the sinister history of this family is, and how they've had a really profound and terrible effect on the region they're in.
You know, It's a Wonderful Life is one of my favorite movies. So if I read this book and that comparison is not apt, I'm gonna come for you, Liz.
We can have a cage match podcast.
It's definitely apt. But these people are the polar opposite of the Bailey family. And the comparison more like if you remember the parts in It's a Wonderful Life where you take George Bailey out and you see what his world would have looked like without him in it.
And Mary Bailey has the worst possible fate for a woman, which is to become a librarian, as I recall.
Exactly. I forgot about that.
Terrible. You are a camp person. You're not a psychic person, but you're a camp person, correct?
Well, I love reading about camp. I never went to camp because I suffered from severe homesickness.
Oh.
But I have a daughter who's a camp counselor. And as I send her off into the wild blue yonder, where she'll be responsible for a cabin full of kids, I do worry that something along the lines of this book will happen. And I really hope it doesn't.
I know you've been talking this one up for a little bit, Liz, so I'm actually pretty excited to get around to it.
It's really great. And if you're a Liz Moore completist, as I am, may I suggest that you go back at some point and read Heft, which is one of her first books. And as much as I love all her books, that one might be my very favorite. I'm not sure. Gilbert, what's next on your reading list this summer?
I sort of went full genre here with my fiction picks. So my last book was a horror book. My next one is a fantasy book. And if horror movie is a slim little thriller, The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman is quite big. I'm going to just pick up my galley here. I'm going to flip to the back, and I'm going to tell you, this is not the final copy, of course, so it could change, but it's about 670 pages. Look at that. That's a big one.
That's a fat book.
That is a fat book. And you know what? Summer can be for fat books. You know, you read this over several months, very satisfying. So Lev Grossman is the author of The Magicians and its two sequels. These books were essentially Lev, who used to be the book critic at Time Magazine. It's essentially his version of Harry Potter, but with kids that are a little more grown up. So there's bad language, there's violence, there's sex, so there's a little bit of Harry. They're very conversant with C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia books. There were 3 of them. I thought they were all pretty great. This is another fantasy book in which he tackles the Arthurian legend. The story of King Arthur, of course, has been told many times in books such as The Once and Future King, to movies like Excalibur, and a few years ago, The Green Knight, to musicals. There's Camelot, there's Spamalot. And Lev takes on that myth that he essentially provides a sequel to the King Arthur story. So it starts with a young man. He very much wants to be a knight with the Knights of the Round Table. The problem is that King Arthur has just died in battle. So by the time he gets there, Camelot is all up in an uproar. There are all these different factions. Grossman knows fantasy. He knows how to take a story that has been well told and put a different spin on it. And I'm actually very excited about this one. There have been a lot of great pre-publication reviews. I get the feeling I'm the only one of the 3 of us that's into fantasy, so I'm not going to ask if either of you are looking forward to this book. But Joumana, I know you have something that's not completely unrelated.
Yes, I'm going to plead the fifth on fantasy, but I am here on horseback with exciting news, which is I have another novel to recommend coming this summer that is related to the medieval English canon. So this is Pearl by Sian Hughes. This was actually longlisted for the Booker last year when it came out in the UK, and now we are getting our taste of it. And frequent listeners of the book review know that I have a particular attachment to stories about sad little girls, particularly if they have lost their parents. This is a really beautiful story. It centers on a woman named Marianne, and she's become a mother herself, but there's a part of her that is really stuck in childhood from when her mother disappeared, and there was a really open question. And you know how surreal it is. Like, you really are stuck in like a time splice, and it makes for very moving reading. So when Marianne is working through this grief as a child, she comes upon something called the Pearl poem, which is from this it's from the 14th century. I think its authorship is contested, but it has the promise of consolation in it. And it really helps her feel less alone working through these feelings. And I know that this sounds like a book if you are doing sad girl summer. I am going to withhold judgment on why you might be reading this book, but I think it's a really beautiful piece of work about how art can mangle us and heal us, and just how we grow forward, even if we've had some difficulty in our life. I really like this one. It's a special book.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Book Review Podcast, and I'm Gilbert Cruz. I'm joined this week by two of my fellow editors from the Book Review, Joumana Khatib and Liz Egan, and we're all talking about summer books that we are looking forward to. Before we get back into some specific titles, I wanted to get a sense from the room here, the big room that we have, as to how you usually spend your summers reading. When you're not reading the books that you have to read for work, are there types of genres that you like to dip into? Do you like to reread old books? What do your summer reading routines look like? I'm going to start with Joumana.
I am known for this. It's become a running joke for my friends that I practice literary cuffing season in the summer, because I tend to choose one author and stick with them the whole summer and try and get through as much of the backlist as I can. So we've had Muriel Spark summer. We've had Dana Spiata summer. So this is something I've been doing for years. For whatever reason, I'm not feeling ready to commit this year, not feeling ready to settle down. Maybe it won't be a sad girl summer, but I know I said this earlier in the episode, but I realized what a blind spot California books are for me. So I think instead of attaching myself to an author, I'm going to attach myself to a state or a state of mind, because California books are so much more than The Day of the Locusts and Ask the Dust. There is The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake by Amy Bender. Dana Johnson's good on California. So that's what I'm going to do. How about you, Liz?
I don't usually do the commitment to one author for a season approach, but I do know this summer I am going to immerse myself in Shel Silverstein because of something I'm working on for the book review. I'm reading all of Shel Silverstein's books. I know I'm going to read Brother of the More Famous Jack by Barbara Treppido, which comes to me from a friend who has been recommending it really highly. And it has a new intro from Maria Semple, the author of Where'd You Go, Bernadette? But for me, summer reading traditions really have more to do with where I'm reading than what I'm reading. I tend to switch back and forth between my front porch and my very humble, torn apart and dusty screened porch. I alternate between the two at different times of day. And then I like to read by as many bodies of water as I possibly can, preferably at the beach, sometimes at the pool. And I like to really see how much water a given book can hold before being illegible.
You are ruining your books. What are you doing?
I know, but that's what they're meant for.
Are they?
I don't know. I think a book, the more loved and wavy and sodden a book is, the more you've enjoyed it.
Oh,
that's how
Liz,
I feel
I
in the
think
summer.
You have known me long enough to suspect perhaps that all my books are pristine because I am a terribly fussy fuddy-duddy. Is this surprising to you?
Not even remotely. It also won't surprise you to know that if I borrowed a book from you, you would never get it back.
Sounds like I wouldn't want it back.
No, you probably wouldn't want it back. But really, that is the sign of a book's life well lived, if it's better, especially in the summer.
You're right. I have issues. I'm going to quickly go into a couple things that I usually like to do with my summer. One, wherever I am, pick up a used old mystery that I've never read before, preferably a short one. I also like to try to read a classic I've never read before. I've been saying for years now that I'm going to do Middlemarch. I might just keep the bit going and never read Middlemarch, but I want to. I have the desire to, and maybe this will be the summer. And then I try a reread, and I've been feeling like I should reread The Secret History, which I probably read 15 years ago for the first and only time, and which was one of the most satisfying months of my life. So I would love to give that one another read.
And for those of us who are on Donna Tartt watch, Donna Tartt, who brings out a book every 10 years. She's late. So Donna, if you're listening, I would love to see the next book. And it's always nice to revisit the secret history.
Donna, if you're listening, write in. books@nytimes.com. Is this how we reach her? Liz, you have another novel set near a vacation locale that you wanted to talk about.
Yes. Well, speaking of the beach, this is a book about a family beach vacation. It's called Sandwich. And appropriately, the family in this book goes to Sandwich, Massachusetts, which I believe is on the Cape. It's a vacation that they have every year, a week-long beach rental. It's a pair of parents and 2 young adult children. And what I love about this book is we see from the perspective of the mother how incredibly excited she is to bring her family all together again, which is something I can relate to as the parent of nearly grown children. And you see how her expectations for the vacation don't always match up with the reality, but lots of exciting things happen, not always for the best. And another way that the title Sandwich is a play on things has to do with the fact that the mother's parents come to visit. So she is, as you might have guessed, in the sandwich generation and is involved with some caretaking for her parents that pulls her away from her kids and her husband. And she's just in this real middle place in life. And I thought that Catherine Newman did an exquisite job of showing that place with a lot of humor and a lot of sensitivity and kindness. And it was a book that I couldn't stop thinking about when I was finished. And it's a lot more uplifting than I'm making it sound. It's very funny.
Gilbert, I'm champing at the bit to hear about more books you're excited about.
I don't know if I believe you, but I'm going to mention one anyway. This is a nonfiction book. There's a book called The Future Was Now. It's by a journalist named Chris Nashawaty. It also sort of has to do with movies and pop culture, but the summer of 1982, when I was in my low single digits, was one of the great sci-fi fantasy movie summers. These are the movies that came out that summer. E.T., great movie, sad, I cry every time. Poltergeist, The Thing by John Carpenter, Blade Runner, the second Star Trek movie, the second Mad Max movie. It really just was, it's become known as one of the greats, right? Not only because of the quality of the movies, some which were blockbusters, some which flopped, but because that summer set the template for a lot of what we see now, these fan-driven, sequel-driven, blockbuster-driven Hollywood landscape that was great for a time and now possibly has actually destroyed movies, in my opinion. All that aside, I'm looking forward to rereading this book and then rewatching all of these movies because I think many of them are among the great movies of the 80s. My enthusiasm overflows for the concept of this book. I don't know if either of you feel the same way, but I'm quite excited.
Your excitement fills the room.
I don't know if I believe you, Joumana.
I'm totally with you. That book sounds amazing. As you were talking, I kept imagining that incredibly scary clown from Poltergeist, who I first encountered, I think, when I was 11. And he could still keep me up at night. He just was pretty much the creepiest clown I've ever seen, enough to turn you off to clowns for the rest of your life.
Are you done with clowns?
Yeah. I've never not been done with clowns, thanks to Poltergeist. E.T. is a movie that really stands up. I don't know when the last time you saw it was, but it's so good.
All right, Joumana, we have time for you to mention one more book that you're excited about before we rattle off some lightning round titles.
Yes, I would like to talk about Charlotte Shane's memoir called An Honest Woman. The author, she's a really incisive critic. I like her essays. She has a very canny perspective on everything she writes about, and she's a real treat to read. So this is actually about how she worked in sex work. And as she was doing that, it was a way for her to negotiate her relationship with the men in her life, grapple with her feminist ideas and what she sees as a very misogynistic culture. It sounds heavy. It sounds like this is something that you might be reading in graduate school, but it's very perceptive and incisive and interesting. And I think it's a perspective that we don't get very often in mainstream literature. So I was really thrilled to see this come out.
Okay, let's go through quickly. There are a bunch of other big books coming out this summer that we don't have a ton of time to talk about, but we would be remiss if we did not mention them. First one I will mention is by last week's guest. This is Swan Song by Ellen Hildebrand. It's supposedly her last Nantucket summer book. I urge you to go listen to that conversation, whether or not you've read any of them. She was a delight to talk to. Liz, what else should we be looking for?
2 other books I would recommend keeping an eye out for this summer are Long Island Compromise by Taffy Brodesser-Akner, who brought us Fleischman is in Trouble a couple of years ago, and also Elisabeth Strout's new book. It's called Tell Me Everything. And I haven't read it yet, but it promises to include some of Strout's most beloved characters, including Olive Kitteridge, Lucy Barton, and Bob Burgess. That's coming out in August.
One book that I'm going to mention that I think a very particular readership is probably very excited about is The Book of Elsewhere. This is by China Miéville and Keanu Reeves, the actor Keanu Reeves. It's based in part on Keanu Reeves' Berserker comic book series. And I have nothing else to say about this book other than Keanu Reeves has co-written a book. And I don't know anyone out there who does not love Keanu Reeves. And if you are one of these people, like Donna Tartt, you should write to books@nytimes.com and let us know why you do not like the great Keanu Reeves. Anything that we missed? I mean, there are a ton of books that we missed. There are many more books that are coming out this summer. And you should check out the fiction and nonfiction summer previews that we published at nytimes.com if you want to get a comprehensive sense of all the great books that are coming out this summer. But otherwise, I think we did it, Liz. I think we did it, Joumana. How do you feel?
I don't like Keanu Reeves.
God damn it.
Oh, wait, this is for the podcast?
Yes, and we are keeping this in.
I don't care. He's not going to call me.
He might.
I just don't understand what the draw is with him.
What's not to like, Liz?
Have you seen any of his movies?
Wasn't he in that one with the bus?
You got to be kidding me right now.
I'm not kidding you. Wait,
Speed?
That's Speed. Wasn't he in Speed?
Yes, he was in Speed.
Yeah, that's why. I just didn't understand why that was such a big deal. I'm sorry. You didn't think it was a little bit overrated?
I can't speak because I'm laughing so loud.
Maybe it's a little bit of a hot take, but I've never been into it.
Oh, Liz, you're great. You're perfect here at the book review. Thank you very much for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me.
Joumana, thank you for being on as always.
My pleasure, Gilbert. Thanks for having us.
That was my conversation with Joumana Khatib and Liz Egan about some books coming out this summer that we're particularly excited about. I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review. Thanks as always for listening.